Achilles and a tortoise paradox. Imagine Achilles, the fastest runner in Greece, racing against a slow tortoise. He gives the tortoise a small head start, but every time he reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise moves a little further ahead. This keeps happening infinitely and Achilles never catches up, which is weird because obviously he would. This paradox suggests movement itself is logically impossible. Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox is the surprising idea that making something more efficient can lead to using more of it, not less. Think of it this way. Imagine a new car is invented that uses half the fuel to go the same distance. You'd expect this to cut down on fuel use overall, right? But here's the catch. Since driving is now cheaper, more people might buy cars, take longer trips, or businesses might expand their fleets. In the end, instead of using less fuel, we could end up burning more. This isn't just theory. It happened in the 1800s when steam engines became more fuel efficient. Instead of saving coal, industries ramped up production and coal consumption skyrocketed. The paradox shows that efficiency alone doesn't always lead to conservation. It can sometimes backfire and lead to even greater resource use. Olbers paradox. Ever asked yourself, why is the night sky dark? If the universe is infinite and filled with an endless number of stars, then no matter where you look, your line of sight should eventually hit the surface of a star. In theory, this means the entire night sky should be glowing as brightly as the sun, because even though distant stars appear smaller, their combined light should still add up. Yet, when we look up at night, we see mostly darkness. Why? Paradox of thrift. When times are tough, people naturally try to save more money to protect themselves. But here's the catch. If everyone starts cutting back on spending at the same time, businesses earn less, jobs become scarcer, and the economy slows down even more. As a result, incomes drop, making it harder for people to save at all. So ironically, the very act of trying to save more during a downturn can end up hurting the economy and leaving everyone worse off in the long run. Unexpected hanging paradox. A judge sentences a prisoner to be hanged at noon on a weekday in the upcoming week. However, there's a twist. The execution will be a surprise. The prisoner won't know which day it will happen until the executioner knocks on his cell door at noon. Left alone with his thoughts, the prisoner starts calculating the date of the execution. He reasons that the execution can't happen on Friday. Why? Because if he's still alive by Thursday, then Friday is the only day left, which means that it won't be a surprise. But since the judge specifically said the hanging would be unexpected, Friday gets out of the question. Then he applies the same logic to Thursday. If Friday is eliminated and he hasn't been hanged by Wednesday, then Thursday would be the last possible day, making it predictable too. So Thursday must be impossible too. Continuing this line of thinking, he rules out Wednesday, Tuesday, and finally Monday. Convinced that the execution simply can't happen, he relaxes, confident that he has outsmarted the system and will live. But then at noon on Wednesday, there's a knock on his cell door. The executioner has arrived. The prisoner is completely taken by surprise, exactly as the judge had promised. Monty Hall problem. You're on a game show choosing between 3 doors. Behind one is a car, and behind the others are goats. You pick a door. The host, who knows what's behind each, opens another door to reveal a goat. Should you switch? Logic says yes. It doubles your chances of winning, even though it feels wrong. Tolerance paradox. Being too tolerant can actually destroy intolerance. Imagine an open society that welcomes all viewpoints, including publicly intolerant groups such as hatred and oppression. If such intolerant groups have the chance to develop and promote their ideologies, they may gain the capacity to succeed and take over, silencing others and killing off tolerance. Other words, if tolerance of everything, including intolerance, is allowed to remain, then we lose precisely what we aim to preserve, a free and open society. That is exactly why some argue that to preserve tolerance, we must draw the line at intolerance itself. Opposite day paradox. If you say today is opposite day, then by the very rules of opposite day, that statement should mean today is not opposite day. But if today isn't opposite day, then your original statement must have been false, which means today is opposite day after all. This creates a never-ending loop where the moment you declare opposite day, it cancels itself out. No matter how you try to define it, opposite day contradicts itself, making it impossible to exist. Fermi's paradox. If the universe is so big and so old, and there are billions of stars with possibly habitable planets, then where is everybody? Basically, with these chances of many existing alien life cycles, or for example, advanced civilization, why no solid evidence shows they exist or their presence, or that even Earth will ever be touched upon, or in other words, any space signals seen on Earth? Barbershop paradox. Imagine a small town with a single barber who follows a strict rule. He shaves every man who doesn't shave himself, and only those men. At first, this seems straightforward. If a man in town doesn't shave himself, the barber takes care of it. But then, a tricky question comes up. Who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then by the rule, he shouldn't shave himself, because he only shaves people who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he meets the rule for men who should be shaved, so the barber must shave him. No matter how you look at it, it leads to a contradiction. This paradox highlights the strange problems that arise when we apply self-referential rules, where something tries to define itself in a way that just doesn't work. Dichotomy paradox. Before you can walk across a room, you must reach the halfway point, but before you reach that, you must reach its halfway point. Keep dividing forever, and suddenly you're trapped. Mathematically, you'll never get to the other side. Hedonism paradox. Chasing happiness too hard can make you less happy. Imagine waking up and saying, "Today, I must be happy no matter what." You try everything, eat your favorite food, watch a funny movie, go out with friends, but instead of feeling joy, you feel disappointed. Why? Because when you obsess over happiness, you start overanalyzing everything. Am I having fun yet? Why am I not as happy as I expected? What if I never feel truly happy? Ironically, the more you try to force happiness, the further it slips from your grasp. True happiness is usually found when you are doing something you enjoy, helping someone, or merely enjoying a moment without overanalyzing it. So the paradox teaches us that happiness is best found indirectly, when we focus on meaningful experiences rather than desperately trying to feel good all the time. Fletcher's arrow paradox. Take an arrow flying through the air. At every single moment, it is in one fixed position. But if at every moment it's not moving, how does it ever get anywhere? Value paradox. Why do we pay so much for things we don't need, but so little for things we can't live without? For example, water is essential for survival, but it's usually cheap. Meanwhile, diamonds are just shiny rocks that we don't need to live on. Yet, they are incredibly expensive. Why is that? Pinocchio paradox. Pinocchio's magical nose grows only when he lies. Now, imagine Pinocchio says, "My nose is growing." If his nose does start growing, that means he was lying, but he told the truth. If his nose doesn't grow, that means he was telling the truth, but his nose is only supposed to grow when he lies. This creates an infinite loop. His nose should grow and not grow simultaneously. The statement keeps contradicting itself so that he couldn't be either telling the truth or lying. Crocodile paradox. Here's a strange scenario called the crocodile paradox. A crocodile kidnaps a child and says to the parent, "I will return your child if and only if you can guess what I will do next." It sounds simple enough. The parent could guess that the crocodile will return the child or guess that he won't. But that's where things get tricky. If the parent guesses correctly that the child will be returned, and the crocodile then decides to hold on to the child, then he is lying because he said the guess was going to be wrong. Thus, the child should be returned. But if the parent guesses the child won't be returned and the crocodile then decides to give him back, he's also breaking the promise, because the parent's guess was wrong, meaning he should not have gone back. Now, the crocodile is in a vicious circle because he can never keep his promise regardless of what he does. This is a paradox because there is no possible way to fulfill the given promise except to disagree with himself. Card paradox. The card paradox has a card on which are written two sentences, one on the front and one on the back. The front sentence says, "The sentence on the other side of this card is true," while the back sentence says, "The sentence on the other side of this card is false." Now, let's try to figure out whether these statements are true or false. If the front statement is true, then the back statement must also be true, which says that the front statement is false. This creates a contradiction because the front statement can't be both true and false at the same time. On the other hand, if the front statement is false, then the back statement must also be false, which means the front statement must be true. But now, we are back to the same contradiction. In the end, no matter what you decide, the two statements can't both be true or false at the same time without contradicting each other. This leads to a paradox that can't be resolved. Grand Hotel paradox. Suppose there is an infinitely large hotel, all the rooms of which are occupied. Then suppose another guest arrives. Naively, one might believe there's no room for this guest since all rooms are occupied. Now comes the twist of the paradox. Because there are an infinite number of rooms in the hotel, you can shift the guest without kicking anybody out. For instance, ask each guest to move from their room to the next one. Then, the first room becomes free and the new guest can be accommodated in room number 1. Now, let's assume that an infinite number of new guests arrive. It's impossible to fit them all in, but because the hotel has an infinite number of rooms, you can still manage to do so. You can ask each of the current guests to move into a room with a number that is double the number of his or her room at the time. In simpler words, the guest in room number 1 moves into room number 2, the one in room number 2 moves into room number 4, and so on. That would leave all of the odd-numbered rooms available, and you could fit in an infinite number of new guests into those rooms. Paradox of enrichment paradox. Adding more food to a predator-prey system can make the whole ecosystem less stable. Instead of just causing the prey population to grow, it can lead to population crashes or even extinction for both the predator and prey species. The problem is that increasing the food supply throws off the balance of the system. For example, let's say you introduce a lot of food to a rabbit population, the prey, in an area with a lynx, the predator. At first, the rabbit population will likely grow rapidly because there's more food. But this abundance causes the lynx population to increase too, since they have more rabbits to hunt. As the lynx population grows too large, they end up hunting the rabbits so aggressively that the rabbit population crashes, and when the rabbits are gone, the lynx population declines as well, since they have nothing to eat. So even though the extra food seemed like a good idea at first, it ultimately disrupted the entire balance of the ecosystem, leading to the collapse of both populations. Stability-instability paradox. It is thought that when two countries both have nuclear weapons, they're much less likely to go to full-scale war with each other because neither side wants to risk nuclear destruction. But at the same time, the fact that both sides have these weapons makes them feel safe enough to engage in smaller, less dangerous conflicts. In other words, since both countries know a big war could lead to a nuclear disaster, they avoid starting one. But they don't mind getting involved in smaller disputes like territorial fights or proxy wars because they believe the risk of it turning into a full-scale nuclear war is low. For example, during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union never directly fought each other, even though both had nuclear weapons. Instead, they fought in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan where they supported different sides, trying to gain influence without going to war directly. So while nuclear weapons made big wars less likely, they also led to smaller, indirect conflicts between the two. Service recovery paradox. Service recovery paradox refers to a situation whereby a company or service provider, which at the initial stages of service delivery does not meet the expectation of a customer, may improve the satisfaction of such a customer when it handles the failure and recovers well. The customer will end up more satisfied if a service failure is followed by a quick and effective recovery than if it had gone without a hitch in the first instance. For instance, if a customer experiences something undesirable, say receiving an order from a restaurant that contains an error on the order, but the service staff is fast in recognizing their mistake, apologizing, and providing a replacement free of charge or other compensation, the customer will end up being better disposed towards the organization than if the experience had occurred without a hitch from the start. This is because the process of recovery showed that there is excellent customer service, responsiveness, and a will to do better in correcting the situation. The paradox lies in the fact that although a service failure is disappointing, well-handled recovery can sometimes create a stronger customer relationship than if there had never been a problem at all. Grandparent paradox. Imagine a time traveler going back in time and killing his grandfather when he was still a child. This would prevent the grandfather from ever having children, which means the time traveler's parent would never be born. However, if the time traveler's parent is never born, how could the time traveler ever exist in the first place? If the time traveler never existed, then who killed the grandfather in the first place? This paradox demonstrates the problem of changing the past. If time travel permitted you to change things in this way, then at some point, it would create an impossible situation in that the person couldn't exist to bring about the time alteration. There is no clear conclusion in this case, since altering the past creates a logical contradiction, that it is one of the best-known consistency paradoxes in time travel discussions. Twin paradox. Imagine two twins, one stays on Earth while the other travels in a super-fast spaceship. When the traveler returns, they find that the twin on Earth has aged more. This happens because time moves slower for the traveler due to their high speed, a concept called time dilation. The traveler also experiences acceleration and deceleration, which affects how time passes for them. The twin on Earth, who stays still, doesn't experience these changes, so they age more. It's like the traveler is on a fast-moving ride while the twin on Earth stays put. The ride's speed and changes in direction make time feel different for the traveler. Raven Paradox. The Raven Paradox is all about how we gather evidence and test ideas, and it has a strange twist to it. It all starts with a simple idea: all ravens are black. To test this, you might think that seeing a black raven would confirm the idea, right? But here's where it gets odd. If you see something black that isn't a raven, like a black car or a black cat, it also seems to support the idea that all ravens are black. This is weird because a black car doesn't have anything to do with ravens, but from a logical point of view, it counts as evidence for the hypothesis because it doesn't contradict the idea. It's still a black thing, just like the ravens we're talking about. The paradox really makes us ask, how do we decide what counts as proof for or against an idea? It's easy to see how spotting a black raven supports the theory, but the idea that seeing a random black object strengthens the idea is confusing. It changes the way we think about evidence, making us question what counts as valid proof in science. Schrödinger's cat paradox. The Schrödinger's cat paradox is one of the most famous thought experiments ever to illustrate just how weird things can get when applying quantum mechanics to everyday objects. Imagine there's a cat inside a sealed box, and inside the box there's a radioactive atom. This atom has a 50% chance of decaying within an hour. If the atom decays, it releases radiation that kills the cat. If it doesn't decay, the cat stays alive. The catch is that the cat's fate depends on this tiny random subatomic event, whether the atom decays or not. Now, here's where it gets weird. According to quantum mechanics, until someone opens the box to observe the cat is in a superposition, meaning it is both alive and dead at the same time. This is because, in the quantum world, particles like atoms can exist in multiple states at once, but this doesn't make sense when we think about regular objects like a cat. A cat should either be alive or dead, not both. This paradox points out the weirdness of quantum mechanics, in which the rules work differently for small particles than for the things we see around us in everyday life. Until observed, a cat is both dead and alive, going against our common sense understanding of reality. Interesting number paradox. Think about looking at all the numbers. You're trying to decide which ones are interesting. First off, you'd think of a number like 1, the first number, or 100 because it's round and easy to remember, or maybe pi since it's so famous and irrational. But here's where it gets paradoxical. Suppose you say, well, there's a number out there that's not interesting, it's just boring. But if you can identify a number as boring, that number becomes interesting in its own right? Because you just made it special by calling it boring. So the idea of a boring number contradicts itself. It becomes interesting the moment you decide it isn't. The paradox will show how interesting or uninteresting labels on things could loop back into a contradiction. Finally, the paradox suggests that every number is interesting because you can always find some reason to make it interesting, either through its properties, its place in a sequence, or just because you decided it was. Birthday paradox. In a group of just 23 people, there's a better than even chance that 2 of them will share the same birthday. Now, you might think that the chances of someone having the same birthday as you are really low since there are 365 days in a year. But here's the twist. The likelihood of 2 people sharing a birthday isn't just about you and one other person. It's about comparing each person's birthday with everyone else in the group. So, as the group gets bigger, the chances of a shared birthday actually increase quickly. In a group of 23 people, you're not just looking at one person, you're looking at 253 possible birthday pairs, since each person's birthday could match with anyone else's. That's a lot of chances for a match, and it turns out that with 23 people, it's more likely than not that 2 will share a birthday. It's a surprising result, because we tend to underestimate how often these coincidences can happen. Paradox of choice. When there are too many choices, it may actually make the decision-making process harder, resulting in stress, anxiety, and sometimes even regret over the choice you make. More options do not necessarily equate to more happiness. Instead, having too many choices can be overwhelming, making you doubt your decision and thus leaving you less satisfied with the outcome. For instance, standing in front of an entire aisle of cereal brands, all with different flavors and types, might make you feel so overwhelmed that you end up not buying anything. Preparedness paradox. The preparedness paradox is such a situation in which, if the society or individual prepares for the potential disaster, be it a pandemic or a natural catastrophe with effective preparation and in turn less harm is caused, people would perceive the danger as being less serious. They then erroneously conclude that the elaborate preparation was unwarranted after all, and the modest loss was indeed from the preparation alone. For instance, when preparing for a hurricane, if cities build very hard infrastructure and many evacuation plans, only to be lucky enough to go through it only with slight minor damage, a lot of individuals will say this was a good overkill effort. This can be a problem because if the preparation proves effective, then it is likely that future events will not have such an appreciation for preparedness. Essentially, when you succeed in avoiding harm, the need for that preparation seems less obvious. And so, one is not as well prepared next time, even though the preparations were what made the disaster not worse. Temperature paradox. Picture this. Someone comes to you and says these two sentences. First, the temperature is rising. This makes perfect sense. We say this when it's getting hotter. And then, the temperature is 90 degrees. This also makes sense. It tells you how hot it is. But now, try to combine them. It becomes 90 degrees is rising. Wait, what? That sounds completely wrong. Even though the temperature and 90 degrees seem to refer to the same thing, we can say one is rising but not the other. That's the paradox. Sword and shield paradox. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? An unstoppable force is something that can never be slowed down or stopped, while an immovable object is something that can never be moved. If both of these things exist at the same time, then they directly contradict each other. One of them has to lose, which means it was never truly unstoppable or immovable to begin with. Pink elephant paradox. If someone tells you, don't think about a pink elephant, what's the first thing that pops into your head? A pink elephant, of course. This paradox shows that the more you try to avoid thinking about something, the more your brain fixates on it. It's like when you're trying to forget an embarrassing moment, but the harder you try to push it away, the more it keeps replaying in your mind. This effect happens with emotions too. If you tell yourself, I'm not going to feel anxious, your brain might actually make you feel more anxious. The reason? Your mind keeps checking to see if you're thinking the forbidden thought, which ironically keeps it active in your head. So whether it's trying to forget an ex, avoid craving junk food, or stop worrying about an upcoming test, the more you resist, the more persistent the thought becomes. It's one of the brain's strange little quirks. Prisoner's dilemma. Imagine two criminals, let's call them Alex and Ben, who get arrested and locked up in separate cells. They can't talk to each other or share any kind of message. The police don't have enough evidence to convict them of the serious crime, but they do have enough to put them in jail for 1 year on a smaller charge. Now, the police offer each of them the same secret deal. If you betray your partner and testify against him, you go free, while he gets 3 years in prison. But if you both betray each other, you'll each get 2 years. If neither of you talks, you'll both just serve 1 year on the lesser charge. Neither Alex nor Ben knows what the other will do. They only get one shot at deciding, and whatever they choose, they're stuck with it. This creates a dilemma. If they both stay loyal and keep silent, they only get 1 year each, which seems like the best outcome for the duo. But if one betrays the other while the other stays silent, the snitch goes free and the other gets 3 years, a nightmare for the one who kept quiet. If they both betray each other, they end up serving 2 years each, which is worse than staying silent, but better than being the one who got betrayed. Because they can't trust or communicate with each other, they each have to think selfishly. This is why the logical choice to betray leads to a worse outcome for both, showing why cooperation is hard even when it benefits everyone. This is the prisoner's dilemma, a famous paradox in game theory. Ship of Theseus paradox. If you replace a ship plank, is it still the same ship? What if you rebuild the old planks into a second ship? Which is the real one? This applies to people too. Your body cells are constantly replacing themselves, so are you still the same person you were 10 years ago? Sorites heap paradox. If you have a heap of sand and remove one grain, it's still a heap. But if you keep removing grains, at what point does it stop being a heap? Strangely, we can't seem to define exactly when that happens. Grain of millet. If you drop 1 grain of millet, it will make no sound. If you drop a whole bag of millet, it will make a loud sound. So when exactly does sound start? This makes us question how we define gradual life changes. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, check out our other videos too.